Hey everyone, and welcome to Voices of History. In this explainer from our series, The Conquest, we're going to tackle one of the most epic and, honestly, one of the most misunderstood events in world history, the fall of the incredible Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan.
You know the story, right? It's the one we all learned in school. A few hundred Spanish conquistadors, these almost superhuman figures, led by Hernán Cortés, show up in a totally new world. And somehow, against impossible odds, they managed to topple this massive empire of millions. It's a tale of destiny, of superior technology, of an inevitable collapse.
But is that what really happened? I mean, really, the actual historical evidence? Well, it tells a much more complex story, and honestly, a way more interesting one. The version most of us got, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. All right, so let's start with maybe the biggest misunderstanding of them all, this idea of a tiny Spanish army. Let's really dig into who is actually fighting against the Mexica rulers of Tenochtitlan. Okay, get ready for this number, because it changes everything. During that final brutal siege of Tenochtitlan, more than 95%, let that sink in, over 95% of the soldiers attacking the city were not Spanish at all. They were indigenous warriors.
I mean, just look at this breakdown. The reality on the ground was, well, it was completely lopsided. You've got this small group of Spanish soldiers, maybe 1,000 of them at their absolute peak, and then you have this massive force fighting alongside them. We're talking tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of indigenous allies. So, to call this a Spanish conquest, it just doesn't fit the facts. It was much closer to a massive indigenous rebellion that the Spanish basically walked into, sparked, and then used to their own advantage.
And this anti-Mexica coalition, it was huge. You had the Tlaxcalans, who alone brought tens of thousands of warriors to the fight. Then you have the Totonacs, the people of Huexotzingo, and get this, even a faction from the city of Texcoco, which was supposed to be one of the Mexica's main partners in the Triple Alliance. So these groups weren't just helpers or sidekicks, no way. They were the main event, the primary military force, and they had their own very good, very old reasons for wanting to take down the Mexica. So that begs the question, right? Why were so many different groups of people so eager to join the Spanish and fight the Mexica? To get that, we have to rewind a bit and look at what the political world of Mesoamerica was actually like before Cortés and his men ever set foot there.
Okay, here's a key word you gotta know. Altipetzli. Seriously, forget everything you think you know about modern countries or nations. That just doesn't apply here. Think of Mesoamerica more like a complex, shifting mosaic of these powerful, independent city-states. Each Altipetzli had its own ruler, its own territory, its own identity, and its own ambitions.
This is why calling it the Aztec Empire can be so misleading. We hear empire and we think of something unified, like the Roman Empire with loyal provinces. But that's not what this was. In reality, it was a tributary hegemony. Fancy words, I know. But it just means the Mexica from Tenochtitlan basically held a bunch of other rival city-states under their thumb through sheer military force. They demanded tribute, stuff like goods, food, and even people for sacrifices. This system didn't create loyalty. It created deep, burning resentment and a powerful desire for payback. So here's the bottom line. The Spanish didn't create these divisions. They didn't have to. They basically just showed up to a party that was already a powder keg. They walked into a world that was already simmering with tension and rivalry, where the Mexica were completely surrounded by enemies who were just waiting for a chance, any chance, to finally get their revenge. Okay, so if the evidence is so clear on this, why do we all still have this image of a few hundred conquistadors doing it all themselves? Why has that myth stuck around for 500 years? Well, the answer has everything to do with who wrote the story down first.
So, when we look back, we've basically got two very different kinds of historical records. On one side, you've got the Spanish chronicles. These are written accounts using an alphabet, usually from the personal perspective of a soldier or an official. And let's be real, they were often writing to make themselves look good, to get rewards and land from the King of Spain. Then, on the other side, you have the Mesoamerican codices. These are incredible pictographic records. Think of it as a form of picture writing, created by trained scribes to document a whole community's history, their family lines, what tribute they paid. They're telling the same story, but from totally different points of view.
I love this quote from Bernal Diaz del Castillo. He was just a regular foot soldier in Cortés's army, and decades later, as an old man, he sat down to write his true history. Why? Because he was frankly ticked off that all the official histories gave all the glory to Cortés and basically ignored guys like him.
He's saying, hey, I was there, and I'm going to tell it like it was. It just goes to show you that even among the Spanish themselves, the story of what happened was a huge point of contention.
And for centuries, historians, mostly in Europe and later in the Americas, had a much easier time reading the Spanish chronicles. I mean, they were written in a language and a format they understood. The indigenous codices, they were way harder to access and interpret. And so just by default, the conqueror's version of the story, which was often self-serving, became the story. It's the one that shaped the narrative we all inherited.
So let's bring this all together. Let's build a new, much more accurate picture of what really went down in 1521.
So, the fall of Tenochtitlan, it wasn't a straightforward conquest. It was a perfect storm. First, you have massive indigenous agency. This wasn't a Spanish invasion so much as a massive internal rebellion. Second, you have the Spanish as catalysts. Cortés and his men brought new tactics, new weapons, and a whole lot of ambition that lit the fuse. Third, you had the political situation. The Mexica's own system of rule had created a world full of enemies ready to pounce. And finally, the unseen killer, disease. Smallpox brought from Europe absolutely devastated the city's defenders, who had zero immunity. All of these things had to happen at the same time.
And here's another key point. 1521 wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. In the decades that followed, you actually have Tenochtitlan conquistadors, now as partners with the Spanish, leading their own expeditions to conquer other regions. The creation of a new society, the one that would eventually become Mexico, that was a long, complicated process that unfolded over hundreds of years.
So when you boil it all down, what's the crucial point? The story isn't about a handful of supermen. It's about a complex world that was already in crisis. It's a story where a small external force, the Spanish, arrived at the exact right moment to tip the balance in a massive war that was basically just waiting to happen.
Because the real story, as it turns out, is always way more fascinating than the myth. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Voices of History for more explainers like this one. Discover what they didn't tell you about the meeting of two worlds.